Script to Screen, an introduction to screenwriting. Now, before we begin, I feel obligated to give a little bit of a brief disclaimer here in that we are not associated with Hasbro, My Little Pony Friendship is Magic. We do not work on the series, we do not write for it, but we are students of the craft, and in the scriptwriting industry, there are several industry standards and industry truisms that once you learn them, they can be applied to virtually any form of screenwriting, including Friendship is Magic. So to introduce myself, I'm Gary Oak on FinFiction.net, and one interesting thing about scriptwriting on FinFiction is they don't accept scripts, because scripts are meant to be produced and performed and not to be read unless you're part of the industry or an actor or what have you. So they understandably don't want script stories, so scripts kind of haven't been talked about too much in the fanfiction community. But I feel it's very important for us to talk about scripts because we're fans of a television series, and the first thing you need to do in order to make a television show is to write a script. So I'm a creative writing major in university, and some of the classes I have taken at upper level include screenwriting classes, for which I wrote some My Little Pony Spec scripts for credit. So there's a bit of credibility there, hopefully. I've written a couple of Spec scripts, we'll get into that a little bit later, and I also wrote a script for a brief animation that we'll be showing off later.
I'm Bad Horse, a fiction writer. I have no credibility with scripts, really. I became interested in scripts because the script writing style, well, I think that movies are the most natural way for humans to experience and to understand stories. Because our brains work to interpret life as we experience it. Things written down on paper are a little difficult for us to interpret. And so a movie communicates a story in the most efficient way possible. And a script communicates a story in the way that humans most naturally interpret. So they're very lean, they're very fast. You can read a script in half an hour that would take you 2 hours to read if it were written out as a novel. And I think that writing and reading scripts will strengthen your prose because it is a different style of writing, which I'll elaborate on a little later, that teaches you to emphasize the kinds of things that humans relate to, pick up more naturally, the kinds of visual things, the kind of show, the show don't tell, you have to show, not tell in script writing. You can't tell. It's impossible to do unless you have a voiceover. So I just think it's a good practice.
Another point to that is we need more scriptwriters in the Brony fandom as a whole, because some fan animations, notable fan animations, didn't have writers. Most notably, I would say among them is Double Rainboom. Double Rainboom had a slew of animators, some of the best voice actors in the fandom. It was just this collaboration of talent, and it was, as far as I know, the only episode-length fan animation, which is just insane and amazing, but there are no writers in the credits, and it shows, unfortunately. And if we had more writers in the script writers in the fandom, that may have not been the case. And as far as I know, the more recent fan animations are getting actual screenwriters who know how to write scripts, so that's very, very encouraging. And before we launch too much into the panel, we will be having about a 10-minute Q&A session at the end, but if you do not understand what we said because we went to scriptwriter lingo-y, you can just raise your hand and ask us for clarification so we don't leave you behind. This is meant to be an introductory level thing, so we'll try not to get too bamboozling with it. Now I'm going to foolishly spend all of the animation budget in one place and show the one piece of interactive media we have, and that's a promotion for Everfree Northwest 2015 that I wrote the script for.
And we're live in 3, 2.
This is Front Page reporting live from Seattle, Washington with Sunrise, a spokespony for the Everfree Northwest Convention. Sunrise, every pony's abuzz about this event. What's in store for us this year?
Well, our Pony Stop concert with earth-shakingly amazing music, fantastic VIP guests, our charity auction, tons of panels and events, our diverse vendor hall,
What the-
cosplay, super awesome electronic and tabletop game room, and best of all, friendship and community.
You heard it here first, every pony. Everfree Northwest sounds like the place to be. Check it out, May 29th to 31st, 2015. So come and join us. Until then, I'm Friend Paige, signing off.
All right, we're off air. Good job, everybody.
Whew, thanks. Hey, Sunrise, how did you do that?
Do what?
Never mind.
And the reason I wanted to show the script itself is, or the animation itself before the script is, there will be some notable differences. This is the program I wrote it in called Final Draft, and you can see this is what the production team had to work off. But what's interesting about this is I wrote this a year prior to it, and they had a different mascot, so they ended up having to change certain things. For example, it's not, you notice it's Cedar Evergreen listed here in the cast, and so they had to change her because they went with a different mascot. So, but you can see even though there are differences, the essence of what I wrote is still there, and you can kind of see the brief directions I gave, and that was interpreted by everyone else, because I actually had no idea they were producing the script until I saw it pop up on my YouTube feed when it was done, because I thought they just ran out of time to produce it that one year. So that's what ended up happening, and you'll notice the date at the very bottom is different. I think I put it, yeah, July 4th weekend, because that was the July 4th, 2014 Everfree. This is for 2015. So one reason why it's notable to look at that and notice the differences is because if you're merely the script writer and you don't have any other involvement in the production, then once the final draft has been approved and goes off to production, it's completely out of your hands and stuff changes, and that's happened multiple times in the series. A notable example of that is the whole Derpy Gate incident. Remember Amy Keating Rogers said, oh, I actually had a lot of stuff before Rainbow Dash lost her temper about, that conflict kind of escalating, but they had to cut that from time. And that was something she had no control over. Another example is Luna was going to visit Rarity at one point in the Nightmare Night episode, but that got cut out too. So,
and the animator can also make changes that reinterprets the character in ways you didn't intend, that you have no control over. Like, there's an example where Mr. Cake is talking about why his foals are a unicorn and a Pegasus. And the way they animated it, his facial expression sort of comes across as, I don't believe a word of this. It's really kind of creepy, but the scriptwriter had no control over that.
Yeah, unless there's a very specific direction that's what the writer wanted to communicate, saying this is exactly what I need in order for this gag to work, then it's not going to be in the script. Because you'll notice here, I don't think they cut out the Parasprites thing. See, that's one example of something I cut. I put two Parasprites fly across the stage carrying a con book opening to the schedule grid. But notice they kept the Princess Cadence costume. And they have the vendor table, stack of papers. So you're probably wondering why they're in all caps on a separate line. That's kind of script writing shorthand for emphasis. And this probably looks a little bit confusing at the start. And the thing is, the script writing format is quite specific. I don't think I can widen it, unfortunately. Is this visible to everybody? Does this look okay?
Can you read the...
Oh, Control Plus? Ah, yes, I see. Let's blow her up. Better? Excellent. Technical difficulties, everybody. I'm a writing major, not an IT major. So, oh geez. So, formatting is really important to the industry, and we're going to go over a little bit of formatting here. And the reason why is script writing, the scripts are very practical because, again, scripts are meant to be used and produced, not read like a novel. So basically what we have here are little directions like, fade in, that's just a basic transition, and then here we have action direction. And all of this formatting that you can see right here, this is all a basic action direction. And notice how all the formatting, like camera pointing, you'll notice like the position on the page, and the OS in brackets mean he's talking off screen, he or she, in this case it's he, and then fade to, and then this up here is called a slug line. This is every time you change locations or move through time significantly, you need a new slug line, and the slug line denotes a scene. So we have interior or exterior. We didn't actually, they ended up not going with the Mount Rainier, I believe, and usually you just put day or night because that tells the production crew at what point you want to shoot. You can be a little bit more specific in animation because they're drawing and you don't have to, because you can't say, oh, I want to shoot this at twilight because you only have a few minutes of twilight shooting, and how many takes are you going to get a day? And if you don't have a good enough take, that means you have to stay an extra day in production. So, character names show up in all caps the first time they appear in the action direction. And then we have more dialogue, and then another scene. And the reason why we have the DJ booth, that's to emphasize it on a separate line. VO is for voiceover, and this is a bit of simultaneous dialogue here with Cedar Evergreen and Front Page. And pretty much the rest of this is more of the same. You kind of get a general idea. And the program we're using is Final Draft. Do you want to talk a bit about programs?
Just that in the industry, most people use Final Draft. Everyone uses Final Draft file formats once they're in production. But that doesn't mean you need to go out and buy a copy of Final Draft, because there are lots of other programs that will produce for two reasons. One is that if you are sending out a script somewhere, you just send them a PDF. They're just going to read the script. They're not going to work with it. They're not going to change it. So they can just use a PDF. And the other is there's lots of much less expensive programs that will produce Final Draft output. And until you're actually selling scripts, or have an agent, you don't need to spend $100 on Final Draft. You can get cheaper programs. Celtex is free. What? Iron Man? I would,
We can't officially condone that up here.
I just wouldn't do that because it's, I used to do that more, and I had too many problems with viruses, and I don't do that anymore. And there's for this, there's no reason, because you can get fine free programs that will produce FDX output, like Celtex, I think Adobe makes it. Okay, yeah. What? GDocs? You can emulate the format with GDocs, but I don't think it has a screen format.
Oh, there is.
Oh, right.
Oh yeah, Final Draft is fast and easy because in my first scriptwriting class, like my 100 level screenwriting class, I tried to do it in Word, and I spent way more time formatting the darn thing than actually writing, because everything has its own, as you see, it has its own specific formatting. It could be in all caps, it could be justified to the left or right, it could be indented, and it could be indented to the left as well, or the right as well.
You can get Word templates for Final Draft output. You can get Writer Duet is a good one. There's a free web version. Scrivener also has a Final Draft version now. They have a script writing mode. Fade In is one that's not free, but it's only $50. Highland, there's a bunch of programs that are cheaper than Final Draft that will produce Final Draft output.
You may wonder why we're harping so much about formatting, but in the industry, if you're reading, hundreds of scripts a day, and it's your job to say this is a good script, this is not a good script, then your eyes are trained to read scripts very, very quickly because they are extremely easy to read because they're not by any means good prose. You can see right here, this is not good prose, and this is the PDF version of it. And if I were reading a lot of scripts and I see a script that's not formatted remotely correctly, I'd say, well, this person doesn't even know how to format a script. They clearly have no idea what they're doing, and they'll discard it very, very fast. And it's a tough industry to get into in the first place, so you need to know what you're doing. And again, the script formatting, it's all done there for practical reasons, because if you see, exterior SeaTac Hilton Day, you know this is a slug line. It can't be anything else because nothing is formatted that way. And with front page in all caps and kind of the center of the screen, you know for a fact that is a character name, and there's going to be dialogue or a parenthetical preceding it.
There's a question way back there.
What's a slug line?
A slug line is basically what a scene is. Like it says this is going to be a scene, so we have the setting, so interior or exterior usually, like it would be int or ext, and then it's in all caps as well, as you can see in SeaTac Hilton. That's where the con was held.
He's highlighted it on the screen right now. It's
Yeah.
the thing introducing the scene that tells you there's a scene change.
Yeah, and then we have a hyphen here, and that says day or night to tell the crew when to shoot. You can be more specific in animation because it doesn't really matter what time of day it is. If you want a scene in precisely twilight, you can just animate that. You don't have to worry about, okay, we have to get a perfect take in the 30 minutes of this, or we have to stay an extra day for production.
Thanks.
You're welcome.
And by the way, in school, like if your teacher said, this has to be 10 pages and yours was 11, and you might fiddle with it and say, oh, I'll make the margins a little bigger, I'll make the font a little smaller. Don't do that.
That ain't gonna work.
Yeah, people will notice.
If you want to cut down your script length here, see this paragraph that I have highlighted right now? See how there's only one word at the bottom of it left? If I were to play around with the specific language, so it says the same thing, and I can get it so the left goes up to the line above it, it's 2 lines, and if you do that enough times, you can actually cut entire pages off your script. That's a really sneaky way to do it, and that's what you need to do, because script writing also has extremely specific page counts. And the reason why it's specific is generally it's 1 page a minute. So if you watch a feature film, it will be around 110 pages on average in script form. For ponies, it's a little bit different because of how animation works, and there's a lot of pure dialogue pages, and those go by very, very fast. So it actually averages out to around 30 pages for an episode, and when it's 30 pages, it's usually no more, no less.
And there is kind of a culture in the industry at the moment of believing specific theories about writing that may say you need a specific plot point between pages 15 and 17. And some people take that more seriously than other people do.
That's more true in films, and it
Yeah.
depends on the structure of what you're writing. If you have a 3-act structure, an act is denoted by, okay, we have a plot point which ends up changing the complexion of the script, and in ponies, when there's like something happens, there's dramatic music and it fades to black and then fades in. That's the act transition, and there's always a commercial break there. And that's when the plot points occur. And in films, it's more precise.
Should I start comments now?
Go ahead.
Okay, I'm going to talk about how video is visual and auditory, and what that means for when you're writing a script, how it changes how you write. Almost nothing except sounds and images should go into a script. You can put some sort of flavoring statements, descriptions of characters in to help the reader. The reader is somebody at the studio, say, who's going through the script as a potential acquisition. But someone reading the script has to be able to understand everything just from the pictures and the sounds, and that includes dialogue. But you can't write background information or character thoughts into action blocks. An action block is a thing that would appear describing what the characters are doing. So if someone writes, Zed glances at the charred frames of cars that were bombed decades ago during the war, back when he still had a family, you can't do that. You should say, Zed glances at the charred frames of cars, because that's what Zed actually does. That's all that you actually see. And you have to find some other way of telling the viewer that the cars were bombed during the war, and when that war was, and that Zed had a family, and that he's thinking of them now. You have to find visual actions that indicate these things, or have him talk about it, which is not usually the best way. And in your slug line, just for another example, you can't say exterior 3 p.m. Because you can't tell from looking at the sky that it's 3 p.m. And so you can't rely on the reader knowing that it's 3 p.m. If that's important, you have to tell them in some other way, visually, or by a character saying, or by a clock. Yes?
Would that vary for something like, say, the Bourne trilogy or the Martian, where they do give very specific indication of date and time?
You mean they have the little digital letters, right? Yeah, well, they've decided to do that because they're showing the viewer, the person watching. What I'm talking about is if there's something in the script that doesn't show up on the screen. So if the slug line doesn't show up on the screen. So they then have to say, show this on the screen. And yeah, that's a convention they do for that reason, because the time is critical. In some shows, yes.
So what you're saying is, if you put exterior 3 p.m., supposedly the director could come back and say, well, what's wrong with 4 p.m.? Because the screenwriter would say, oh, it doesn't matter, just so long as it's afternoon, then write the exterior afternoon.
Yeah, exactly. And if you want something specific, an example of that is in the script that I wrote that you saw the animation for, a red circle with the recording logo blinks at the top right corner of the screen for a couple seconds. I put that in the action directions because I said this has to be here, and you saw it made it through to production. So that's how I did it. My slug line was just merely exterior SeaTac Hill day.
Try to leave most of the detailed decisions about the camera, acting, sound, and costumes to the cinematographers and the actors and the composer and sound engineers and costume designers, because film is collaborative, and you have these other people who do these other things better than you do. So it's slightly different from writing a novel in that way, that you're not the great visionary who is in control of everything. You are one person in a collaborative effort, and you want to leave room for the other people who are better than you at certain things to do their thing.
Although you can have multiple roles, and a lot of writers in the industry do have multiple roles. Like, for example, a lot of writers also happen to be directors. So that's how they maintain control of their project. Because if you're merely the script writer, you send your script off. You saw there were many alterations to my script that they didn't ask me, they just did them. Because that's all I was just the writer. I gave them the script, that's it.
One way that I think script writing differs from writing prose, one way I express it is to say that it's like writing without having the verb to be. It's like writing without the word is. That you have to be specific. So you can't say, Bill was a mean bastard. You have to say, Bill kicked the puppy. And I have you can't give a vague description. Like, if I was at a place called the Dwarfy Stain in Scotland, which is a 4,000-year-old tomb. And in prose, someone might be tempted to say the Dwarfy Stain is a strange and lonely place. Well, you can't put that in script. How is the director going to film a strange and lonely place? So you might say, there's a square slab of granite in the middle of a field, like an enormous army tank, and in every direction around, the lichen-covered stone, bare peaked, broken only by stunted tufts of grass, stretches away into the fog. right? And I'm not trying to be purple there. Those are all specific images, so the director knows what goes on the film, and they try to convey what I want. And that's what I was getting at when I said writing a script may improve your prose writing, because it forces you to write like that instead of like it's a strange and lonely place.
Although one thing you need to keep in mind is you need to kind of shift your mindset, because generally you go past tense in writing prose, and in screenwriting, as you can see, you may have noticed this, but everything is in present tense, and the things you want to avoid while doing screenwriting is an ing. You want to avoid those, rather than like the two panelists are sitting, we just say the two panelists sit.
One interesting thing about film is that scripts use more visual symbolism than prose does. So movies do have ordinary thematic symbolism, just like novels do. So, you know, the radiation monster Godzilla destroys Tokyo, and this is, you know, pretty clearly related to Japanese anxieties about the atomic bomb destroying cities, or the mutants in X-Men 2. I think are pretty clear, because the actors and directors have talked about this openly, how they're a symbol for being gay in American society today. And that's when you have a plot element that symbolizes a thematic element. Movies are more likely to have another layer of symbolism on top of that, where you have visual symbols that remind you or hint at these plot elements. So places can have symbolism. Returning to the same place can symbolize the completion of a journey, like in The Hobbit or The Lord of the Rings. When you come back to the Shire at the end, it symbolizes the completion of a character arc. Or it can symbolize if you keep not getting past a location, like in Groundhog Day, when he keeps waking up in bed in the same place, it symbolizes being stuck on your character arc. Yes? You mean if you're adopting a book, for instance?
That's a whole new can of worms. That's tough.
I would say in general, adapting a novel, a movie is most like a short story. So really the action in a movie most naturally fits the action in a short story. And when people take a novel and they adapt it to a movie, they have to leave a lot out.
Rest in peace, Tom Bombadil.
And that's sort of the easiest answer is you're going to have to cut a lot of stuff out.
And if you want to go really fast, scene, you can actually have, like 10, 20 different scenes. Well, maybe not 20, but many scenes on the same page, because you just go exterior, da-da-da-da-da, and then you have like one little bit of action direction, and then you switch scenes, and that would make it go really fast, and it works that way. And you can also have series of shots, which is another type of formatting that the script that I pulled up that we'll talk about later has.
It's kind of a problem because it screws with your page count, because it will make your page count come out not to be the expected page count, and then people may reject your script.
Yeah, the theory is it should average out though. Some pages will take like more than a minute or less than a minute to produce. That's why it's usually like averages out to a page a minute over like 110 pages.
Sorry, a question back there?
Regarding adaptation, have you read the book Martian?
I have not.
Well, basically there are a few things they left out regarding just problems that the main character encounters. And I feel they were cut not for time, but because at that point in the story, it would have interfered with the sort of progression of arc paragraph, the progression they were setting up. Because you didn't see the movie, right?
No.
Oh, I haven't seen it either, I'm sorry.
Well, basically, it was there were parts towards the end where he encountered even more problems after he already dealt with some pretty big stuff. And I feel like they
haven't seen the movie, I can't.
Yeah, it's tough to comment on that.
I'm going to have to stop taking questions for this section because I have to finish this section in 5 minutes.
That's actually.
Oh, well, just wanted to talk about how different types of symbolisms are common in movies. With locations, small places will often symbolize restriction or lack of opportunity. Doors will symbolize thresholds, passages, divisions. Geography has a special kind of symbolism where going up symbolizes often learning or discovery. So mountains, you'll find, are maybe associated with sages. Like at the end of The Force Awakens, Luke is standing on the top of the mountain because he's a great sage. Going down can symbolize descent, like Dante's descent into the animal and the subconscious, where you go to learn about yourself, your innermost thoughts, to confront your inner demons, like the cave on Dagobah in The Empire Strikes Back, like Dante's Inferno. Going up a river usually symbolizes penetrating into the interior mysteries of something. So it's actually more like going down than like going up. And strangely, up and down are pretty similar. Going flat is not in between the two. Going level is, up and down are more alike than flat and level is like zero. Story problems and goals often have visual symbols, like in modern times, a Charlie Chaplin film about industrialization. There's a famous scene where Charlie is caught inside the machine and he sort of becomes part of the machine, which is symbolizing the fear that movie is expressing. Darth Vader has to remove his mask in the Star Wars trilogy. In Breaking Bad, when Walt first says, "I'm going to be a bad, tough guy," he shaves his head, and that's sort of the visual representation of he's changing who he is. And if a plot element doesn't have a visual symbol, its resolution is often accomplished by a visual, is manifested visually, like when Luke lifts his X-wing out of the swamp. It's a visual, you're accomplishing it visually. The first acts in particular of movies have a lot of foreshadowing, more so than you typically have in novels. And partly this is because movies go by really fast, and the viewer has to catch everything as it goes by. He can't back up and reread something. So they do all sorts of little tricks to cue people as to what's happening and what's about to happen. So in 12 Angry Men, heat symbolizes stress. And when the fans turn on and start working again, foreshadows when the votes of the jurors start changing in the other direction. In The Godfather, when there's oranges in the Godfather trilogy, if there are oranges on screen, it means something violent is about to happen. And there's no logic to that, but if you see oranges, you know somebody's going to get shot. And it helps prepare the viewer for these violent scenes.
Did Applejack direct that Fun fact, Michelle Creeper, the voice actress for Apple Bloom, actually doesn't like apple juice. She drinks orange juice.
Oh,
I'm not kidding.
I didn't want to know that.
I'm sorry, I've ruined it for you.
You take over.
Yeah, I'll get into what spec scripts are briefly. I mentioned what a spec script is, and a spec script basically is, it's basically like writing fan fiction. That's what my reaction was when I first heard it. You may have seen on screen this fairly long script. It's 30 pages because the first page is the title page, which doesn't count. This is a full episode-length script for My Little Pony that I wrote as if I were a writer on the series. So that means it has to fit within the continuity of the show. It can't have been really done on the series before, so it could be realistically produced as its own episode. And what that does is it proves to agents that you are capable of writing for a series like that, because if you write a spec script, you're probably not going to get a job working for that series. One example is M.A. Larson himself got his start in the industry by writing a couple of SpongeBob spec scripts, but he got hired by a completely different studio than the one that produces SpongeBob. Ideally, in a spec script, you're going to want a series that's been around for a few seasons and will probably be around for a few more, but you don't want to write for something that has been around for a really long time, like, say, The Simpsons, because other than not having been funny for about a decade, it's pretty much every possible thing that you can do in The Simpsons has probably been done. So writing a spec script and it has to be new and original, that would fit in the show, that's a really tall order when you're looking at something that's 26 seasons long, or however long Simpsons are. It's probably not a good idea to write pony spec scripts anymore. This one that I wrote here specifically, I wrote back in season 3, and it's basically Scootaloo wanting to train for this tournament, but she ends up getting sick, and instead of listening to her friends and taking it easy, she wants to train harder and harder and harder and keep pushing herself. And the second the tournament happens and it's her turn to go up, she comes down with feather flu and has to take some really nasty medication at the end. And that's kind of similar to Flight to the Finish, and I'd say it's similar enough that my spec script is now invalidated as a true spec because of that. It may still be useful in a portfolio, I'm not sure. Another spec script I wrote that I don't have up is actually like for a full 2-part episode where I introduce like a new villain, and I even have a song in there, but I was advised later by my scriptwriting professor that you generally don't want to introduce new characters into a spec script, so that's a little bit interesting. And so we've talked about the ideals in a spec script. Again, this is generally how you get a job in the screenwriting business, because you don't usually write your own show until you've been around for quite a while. It may take 5 or more years working for other people, writing freelance for different series before they say, hey, can you be the head writer of this show? And we'll briefly go over this. We're a little bit strapped for time, so I won't spend too long. This is just the little intro. This is a little teaser that you get before the opening credits. So basically, you can see there's a lot of dialogue here. Yeah, see, this is a series of shots, and this is them saying, oh, this, I think it was trying to get their cutie marks. Yeah, remember last time you had an idea? And then you see them kind of messing up. You see they perform a juggling act while dressed in clown suits on a wooden stage. They run into each other and collapse in a heap with the balls falling around them. And then B, they sit in a small folding table playing chess. Scootaloo is checkmated by a filly much younger than she is, and so on and so forth. You'll notice I have the slug lines bolded. That's just something I saw in M.A. Larson's script. I asked him why he did it, and he just said he likes the style, and I kind of like it too. I have numbered dialogue here. You generally don't see numbered dialogue until it's like a final produced specs, like a produced script. So I just did that for frame reference and just to sort of signify that this is done. And at the end of teaser, that transitions into the opening credits and then a commercial break. And then Act 1, we just go into Act 1, and that keeps going until we hit a plot point, which will be end of Act 1. And at the end of Act 1, it'll fade to black, commercial break, fade into Act 2, and then you do the same with Act 3. Act 2 is generally longer than the rest of it, because you see Act 2 starts on page 13, and it goes for quite a while. Act 3 is usually really short. Pony scripts kind of tend to wind up, and yeah, see Act 3 is like page 23 all the way to page 30, and they kind of wind up in 30 seconds, and that's it. So the climax happens, 30 seconds, done. So I would have liked to go over that a bit more, but we're kind of strapped for time. So one thing I want to do now is a brief episode analysis that I did a while ago. All I did was spend about 45 minutes watching with a writer's eye and sort of analyzed an episode. And the episode I chose to analyze was The Return of Harmony Part 1. because I originally did this panel with M.A. Larson back at Everfree a year ago. So I wanted to talk about one of his episodes. So, Return of Harmony Part 1, and you can do this, by the way. All you have to do is know how scripts work. The teaser, that's from zero to a minute and 38 seconds, so it's around a minute and a half. And all it does is introduces Discord and leads into the primary plot, and that's all it does. And then from 2:14 to 7:53, which is about 5.5 minutes, we have Act 1. The beats of Act 1 are what's going on, there's chaos everywhere, and then Discord, exposition, and the call to action. Remember how there's the note for Twilight to go to Canterlot, and Celestia explains who Discord was, and we get that information really, really fast. And then the plot point is, oh no, the elements of Harmony are gone, because the plan was just, okay, take the elements of Harmony and zap Discord into oblivion. But surprise, Discord took them. And then from 7:53 to 13:48, which is 6 minutes, we have Act 2. And the new plot is, okay, we have to go on a quest to retrieve the elements, and then Discord appears. And then we have the hedge maze, which further demonstrates Discord's power. And Discord then begins to break Applejack after splitting the ponies up and removing their flight and magic, thus depriving them of their greatest strengths. And so he basically turns the main 6 into 6 Applejacks. And see, we use AJ's cutie mark, and we see that visual cue there. Because you notice every single time Discord manipulates one of the main 6, we see their cutie mark kind of represented visually. And he lures her and suggests he'll suggest it does the same. He'll do the same to the others, because since we see Applejack's cutie mark at first, we think, oh no, he might do that to the rest of them. And Act 3, oddly enough, is 8 minutes long, and that's one thing that's noteworthy about pony episodes is the act structure is not rigidly set in stone. I've seen, I think, like a 12 or 13-minute act in one of the season 1 episodes. They're given a lot of flexibility. I think as long as the acts are more than 4 minutes long, you can get away with it in ponies. That's kind of a rare luxury in pony scripts, because a lot of other television shows will say, okay, the acts have to be exactly this many pages, this many minutes. No real flexibility.
I think this particular one may be longer because it's the first part of a two-parter.
Yes. But oddly enough, each of the episodes are their own self-contained 3-act structure. You know, they have a beginning, a middle, and end, and a climax. In Act 3 of this, the objective is, okay, make it to the center of the maze. And we see the breaking of the cast as Twilight is helpless to stop Discord. And then Rainbow Dash leaves the game, causing Discord to win. And that's the climax. And notice, 15 seconds later, the episode just winds down, and that's it. And we get the to be continued. Another episode I did a lot more briefly was Sonic Rain Boom. We have a, half-a-minute teaser, which is just a setup showing Rainbow Dash's training, with the whole yay back and forth, and then 5 more minutes is Act 1, which is the beat is Rainbow Dash is trying to perform the Sonic Rain Boom, and then we have an exposition as to what it is, and then the plot point is Rarity's Gossamer Wings. The second act is 7 minutes long, and the beat is performance anxiety build-up. It's just build-up, build-up, build-up. And the plot point is, Rarity decides to enter the competition, so that, as you can see, changes the complexion of the episode. And then the third act, which is actually another long Act 3, I guess M.A. Larson likes long Act 3s, the whole thing is the competition, and then the climax is the Rarity Icarus reference, and the whole Sonic Rain Boom and saving the Wonderbolt's lives. The last thing I wanted to talk about with specific episode structure here is a sitcom, because you wouldn't associate My Little Pony with sitcoms, but they actually do have a few sitcom episode structures, and those are, good examples are Tradia and Castlemania. My Little Pony episodes are usually just one plot with no subplots, and it's fairly linear and pretty easy to follow. A sitcom, however, usually has an A and a B plot, which are shown interchangeably, and they are weighted roughly equal. And you'll notice that with the Tradia one. For example, you have the Rarity and AJ, and then the Fluttershy Rainbow Dash shopping adventures in Tradia, and where we see those kind of, one then the other, one then the other. That's like an A and B plot in action. Then you have a C plot, which is kind of a minor one, and that's the whole Twilight and Pinkie one. It's not shown as much, and then they end up intersecting. One odd thing to note about that is sitcoms are usually 2 acts, like, you know, like 2.5 Men or whatever, like just a standard sitcom. They're usually a 2-act structure, but the sitcoms in Pony fit the show's 3-act structure.
Because they have a set number of commercial breaks.
Yes, and you'll notice that's part of the practical script writing thing, is if you want to write for commercial television, you have to accept the however many act structure, and it's to conform around the commercial breaks. So I believe we have a few minutes to talk about other things before we go into Q&A. Is there anything you wanted to mention?
I'm good for Q&A. I didn't know.
Yeah, I'm good for Q&A too. That about wraps it up. We're gonna have a standing. Do we have a mic for Q&A anywhere? Okay. This gentleman will handle all Q&A.
Yes. So if you guys have any questions, you can just form a line right here. A couple of things. Please keep the questions PG. And if you have anything further to add to the discussion, please hang on to that. You can discuss it with them at Quills and Sofas, which is right across from Hall of the Moon.
I'll be spending most of the rest of today in Quills and Sofas until 6 p.m. So
my question is, if you know, what are the differences between screenwriting for animation versus live action? Do you use fewer pans and cuts, things like that?
generally, it's a page a minute for live action, as opposed to the biggest difference is the page count. You don't usually worry too much about the cameras, because that's not really your job as the writer. You have to think of the cameras, but you generally don't have camera directions unless you need this exact specific camera direction to make this work.
I have been told by, Straczynski, the Babylon 5 guy, wrote a book on script writing, and he has a chapter on animation in there. Actually, I will mention a few books. And what he says about animation is that the page count is different because you do give more specific camera directions in animation, because there isn't, because otherwise the animators are just going to run crazy. There isn't a director in the same way that there is for a movie. But I have never seen an animated series script. They're really hard to find.
I couldn't get my hands on a Pony official script. I asked the writers on Facebook and Twitter. They said, okay, well, you have to contact the studio. And then I contacted DHX, and they said, no, you have to contact Hasbro. And I was like, well, that's the end of that. I don't know anybody who sells animated scripts, so it is a little bit of a mystery to me. But there are different. I mean, that's a really good question, which I wish I knew more of the answer to, because you can, in some cases, the visual gag is going to be something that you can't do in live action, but on the other hand, the animators are better at visual gags than you are, so you don't want to be too specific. Yeah, you give them just enough, and it's up to the storyboard artist. The storyboard artist, like, for example, like Sibsy, she would look at the script and sort of say, okay, this is what these story cards are going to be, and then if your writing is good and expressive enough, then they can extrapolate what it's supposed to look like in the storyboard, and then the animators and layout artists and all them, they bring it to life later on down the road.
What if you're writing something, what you believe is original, and it happens to rip off something else?
Then
Darn.
don't sue them. That is actually not something that you as a writer need to worry about. It's what studios worry about all the time. This is why they don't want to read. Like there are books that you can read that will tell you what is the process for sending out spec scripts. And the one thing people don't want you to do is send them a script without having asked first if you can send them this script, because they are afraid that you will send them a script and they will open it and it will turn out to have something similar to something they have already started working on, and then that you will sue them. So that's what they worry about. I don't think, that happens. I don't worry about it. Oh, you mean if somebody, you mean you go into it and you know there's something out there?
Then it just happens sometimes.
Yeah.
And
Great minds think alike.
that's how, like, that's why show staff are forbidden to read fan fiction, contractually forbidden to do that, because that way, if, say, I write a fanfic and then it turns out to be exactly like an episode, 3 years later, I can't say, oh, it was my idea, they stole it. No, they couldn't read my stuff.
I sort of suspect actually that the show writers went to Hasbro and said, please say that we're forbidden to read fan fiction. So we have an excuse.
Like, for example, this Spec script was similar in many ways to Flight to the Finish, but that's a coincidence because by law, the writers haven't read this. There's no way. Yeah, that just happens sometimes.
Hey, first of all, great panel.
Thank you very much.
So I teach a class on acting and improv theater, and later this month, with my kids, I'm going to be putting on a play, and so I'm in the middle of writing a script. And so I wanted to ask that many of the tips you've given here today are specifically for animation or for movie writing. So do you think that the tips you've given today on script writing can carry over to a script that's made for the stage?
Stage play formatting is decidedly different than screenwriting, because in a stage, it's stationary, it's one stage, and there's a lot less you can do with that, and we have to think in terms of the stage. I'm not too familiar with it, but I know there's a very big difference between audio, stage, and screen scripts, and I apologize if we weren't too specific with that. One thing I can say is you don't want too many stage directions. It's almost purely dialogue, because the first thing that happens when someone directs a stage play is they just axe almost every single stage direction unless it's extraordinarily important. So just don't put them there unless they're integral.
So when I said that scripts are very visual, in a film script, you will have a lot of things where you indicate something by showing a close-up of a clock, by showing a close-up of something on the protagonist's desk, and you just can't do this on a play. So the play relies more on dialogue, which is hard for kids, I think. But you still are trying to think visually. You usually just have one set too. You can't zoom around, you can't use camera to signify things. So it's a tougher thing to do, and they tend to be more cerebral, more dialogue oriented. But they're still, more dialogue, but you still do have to get everything across in the objects, the action. I would say think about the action, think about the character action more.
Since you're doing acting classes, you're probably familiar with how like slashing and beating and verbing works with script. So you want dialogue that lends itself well to that, to give people something to work on.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Hi, my name is Nicholas. I've actually been working on a series of books since high school. They're not very good right now, they're updating. Where the lead character is a screenwriter in Hollywood, and basically the amount of issues he has to deal with. Now, I'm a bit ignorant on what it's like living as a screenwriter or how screenwriters work on studios. Do you have any suggestions, or is there anything I should not do in order to properly portray a screenwriter?
That's a difficult question.
Listen to the Script Notes podcast by John August, who talks all about screenwriters' life and how you be a screenwriter.
Script notes?
Script Notes. Yep. And they typically live in Los Angeles because it's networking. Networking is just huge, for film especially.
If I were to become a professional screenwriter, I would either have to move to LA or Vancouver, because there's a lot of stuff produced in Vancouver and I'm Canadian, so it would be easier for me to get there. Yeah. Yeah, a lot cheaper.
A lot prettier too.
Yeah. Less smog.
Hey, I'm Titanium Dragon.
ATD.
Yep. So when you guys, when someone sends out a script, how much back and forth things normal? Because I know that they send it out and get the notes back. How many times does that happen?
I have no idea.
It's, you mean from if you're trying to get an agent or if you're in the, like, say an MLP, I think that happens 2 or 3 times in the MLP production because, you know, you have the writer's summit where they sort of, this is the vague idea of the script we're going to write, and then, okay, let's get the outlining, and then they have to send the outlines out, then they get notes back from the studio and the director and maybe the head writer, and then they write the draft, and then they send that out, and then they get notes back, and there's a few of those before it goes into the final draft stage, as long as it doesn't get killed in any of those processes, because there's a lot of episodes that just die before that happened. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Before we close up, because we have half a minute left, if you're curious about the spec script I wrote, it's called A Feather in Her Cap. I actually made the mistake of writing a fanfic and then turning it into a script, and then the script turned out better, so then I turned the script into a fanfic, and it's up on fanfiction.net and Equestria Daily, and I believe I have a hot link to the script there, so you can study it more in depth if you so desire.
And I printed out the outline of the talk we gave, and the last page of this outline has a list of references and books that you might want to read about script writing. And I think I printed 30 copies because I'm a social Darwinist.
You're optimistic.
No, I'm kidding. I just like seeing people fight. But if they are here, if you want to come pick them up, and if you are quicker than the other people sitting in the back.
With that said, thank you so much for attending this panel. I hope you found it enjoyable and informative. Have a great rest of BronyCon, everybody.